Terror can strike when the wild moves closer than you expect. From the horrifying grizzly attack at a Sakhalin Island school assembly to a deadly polar bear ambush near Svalbard, these 6 encounters show how quickly ordinary days in nature can turn into fights for survival. In this video, we'll dive into 6 chilling tales of bear attacks on humans, from schoolyards to remote wilderness. Get ready to witness moments that test the limits of human courage against some of the planet's most fearsome predators. The morning air on Sakhalin Island carried the crisp coolness of early autumn, with a light breeze moving steadily across the schoolyard as children assembled for the start of their day on September 22, 2025. The sun was only beginning to rise higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement and painted lines of the yard. Teachers moved among the rows, gently guiding the youngest students toward the front, while the older children shuffled into place behind them with practiced familiarity. Laughter echoed from the groups of friends greeting one another, their voices weaving together into a lively hum. For the staff, this morning routine was an ordinary ritual, a way to gather every student in a safe and orderly manner before classes began. On this particular morning, however, the familiar rhythm of school life would be shattered in a way no one had foreseen. The fence surrounding the yard was intended to serve as a simple barrier, keeping the children inside and discouraging stray animals from approaching too closely. It had always seemed more than adequate, yet it was no defense against the force of a hungry, food-conditioned grizzly bear that had grown desperate after a season of scarce natural forage. Drawn by the mingling scents drifting from the school kitchen and the noise of hundreds of voices clustered in one place, the animal moved steadily through the tree line at the edge of the property. At first, its approach went unnoticed. Only when posts snapped and wood splintered under tremendous weight did anyone realize the danger. The violent entrance silenced the yard in a single instant before giving way to chaos as the grizzly surged forward and crashed through the weakened fencing with terrifying strength. The animal's first strike landed among the youngest children standing at the very front of the assembly. 4 students, between the ages of 7 and 10, were directly in its path. The bear's claws, several inches long, swung with bone-crushing force, and the weight of the beast was overwhelming. In a blur of muscle and fury, it struck them down. Screams erupted immediately, and the bright colors of jackets and backpacks were blurred by the sudden violence. The sight froze the gathering in collective horror, but the paralysis lasted only seconds before it broke into panic. Teachers reacted instinctively. Some rushed forward, raising their arms in futile attempts to block the swipes, while others grabbed the nearest children by their shoulders and dragged them away. Yet the animal's speed and strength made every effort feel powerless. It struck and bit in rapid, violent succession, its movements unpredictable and chaotic, driven by both instinct and the confusion of being surrounded by so many figures darting in every direction. Older students scattered in blind terror. Some scrambled up the chain-link fence, shoes slipping against the rattling metal as they fought to climb over. Others dropped to the ground and pressed themselves against the brick walls of the school, huddling together in desperation. A few dove behind benches or trash bins, praying the animal would not notice them. The air filled with a deafening chorus of screams, the high-pitched cries of children colliding with the guttural roars of the bear. Teachers, frantic and desperate, shouted, banged on gates and hurled bags and jackets, doing anything they could to pull the predator's attention away from the children. Still, every act seemed to vanish against the immensity of the danger. The 4 small victims endured the brunt of the first onslaught. Their cries cut through the yard, piercing even the chaos as teachers fought to reach them. Yet every approach was met with another furious swipe or lunge of the bear's jaws. Elsewhere, children were knocked down and trampled as their classmates pushed past them in desperation to escape. Cuts, bruises, and sprains were sustained, not just from the animal, but from the frantic rush to survive. Several slipped across broken sections of fence, tumbling into the street beyond, where they crouched behind dumpsters or pressed flat against parked cars, trembling as they covered their heads and waited for the horror to end. Inside the school, staff members slammed doors shut, locking them and pulling in the children who managed to make it across the threshold. The principal triggered the emergency call and shouted for teachers to herd students into hallways and classrooms. Yet the open yard remained a scene of terror, the grizzly circling with its fur bristling, slashing at anything that moved. The animal's massive frame, blotting out the thin morning sunlight, created a sight no one present would ever forget. Emergency responders arrived only minutes later, though to those trapped, it felt as though time had slowed into an eternity. Sirens wailed through the narrow streets, their rising pitch momentarily drawing the predator's attention. In that brief distraction, staff managed to usher another group of students out a side gate, urging them to sprint down the road. Armed officers poured into the yard, their coordinated shouts cutting sharply through the chaos. They fired into the ground and used flares, forcing the bear back toward the fence line with calculated urgency. The animal hesitated, disoriented by the explosions of sound and flashing lights, but its aggression had not ebbed. It lunged once more toward the fallen children, and responders met it with louder gunfire and blinding bursts. At last, the grizzly turned and retreated, thrashing through brush and disappearing into the trees. The yard fell into an unbearable silence, broken only by sobbing and the frantic movement of rescuers. Teachers and paramedics rushed immediately to the victims. Their hands trembled as they worked, but the first 4 strikes had sustained devastating injuries that could not be undone. The realization of this loss struck the entire community like a physical weight. Other children were quickly treated for cuts, bruises, and shock, while countless more stood frozen in tears, clinging to adults whose faces carried their own quiet horror. Parents began arriving within the hour. Some sprinted directly from workplaces, others arrived still unaware of the scale of what had happened. What met them was the sight of flashing emergency lights, police tape stretched across the familiar yard, and ambulances departing in grim procession. In the days that followed, officials delivered urgent warnings about the dangers of food-conditioned bears in remote communities where garbage, livestock feed, and even school kitchens could provide easy opportunities. Wildlife specialists explained how a poor season of salmon and berries had driven animals closer to towns in aggressive search of alternatives. They stressed that routine gatherings like a school assembly could become deadly once a bear lost its fear of human activity. The tragedy left a lasting mark on the town, a reminder that coexistence with wilderness required constant vigilance, and that even the most ordinary of mornings could turn in a single instant into something that no one could ever forget. The air over Kodiak Island on the morning of August 30th, 2024, carried the damp chill of late summer. Mist clung to the spruce stands and hovered over moss-covered ground, while the faint salt of the nearby ocean drifted inland, mingling with the earthy scent of wet soil and tundra. Across the uneven terrain, 3 hunters advanced with deliberate caution. Their boots pressed deep into the spongy moss as their eyes swept constantly for movement. Each step carried the reminder that these lands belonged first to the largest bears on Earth. Here, they were only guests. Experience and resolve guided them. Alex Bennett, 38, hardened by decades of Alaskan hunts, embodied the measured balance of reverence and excitement that came with pursuing an animal both magnificent and deadly. Ryan Cooper, 31, had less experience but carried the restless energy of youth, eager to test patience and skill against the wilderness. Matt Dawson, 29, served as the steady counterweight, relying on instinct and a cautious approach to guide his choices. Their planning had been precise. Each man carried a scoped rifle, camouflage layered against the chill, and designed to blend into muted greens and browns. They carried themselves with quiet confidence, fully aware of the risks, yet choosing to face them. Signs of their quarry had been everywhere. Along salmon streams, half-eaten carcasses lay scattered, torn apart with immense force. Bones and flesh bore the marks of a predator that consumed with ferocity. Deep paw prints pressed into mud stretched wider than a man's hand, silent evidence of the animal's enormous size. Overturned stones and faint trails through grass showed its passing, each clue sharpening awareness that an encounter was near. Earlier that morning, they had set a bait station downwind, confident the scent would travel. Now they crouched low in tall grass, waiting in tense silence as every sense locked onto the dark edge of spruce trees. It was Alex who noticed the first flicker of movement. A ripple of shadow crossed the tree line, and then a colossal Kodiak bear emerged. Its fur hung damp with mist, and its massive head swung slowly as it tested the air. Catching the mingled sense of bait and human presence, it paused before stepping into the open. At 150 yards, the sight of it was overwhelming. The bear moved like a mountain of muscle and thick fur, a living weight pressing down on the hunters as though the very ground trembled beneath its presence. Alex dropped into a prone position, steadying his rifle on his pack and drawing a controlled breath. Matt shifted alongside, preparing to fire if Alex's shot faltered. Ryan stood rigid, tension locking his body as the bear's gaze fell on them. For a moment, the world seemed suspended. Silence stretched tight like a wire. Then the stillness shattered. The bear dropped into a charge, accelerating with terrifying speed. Its paws thundered against the tundra, each stride devouring ground. In seconds, it covered distances that felt impossible. Alex fired first. The rifle cracked, echoing across the valley. His bullet struck the bear's shoulder, staggering it but failing to halt its momentum. The predator roared, a sound so deep it seemed to reverberate through the earth itself. Pain only magnified its fury, and it surged forward with renewed force, massive frame bearing down on them. Ryan stumbled backward as claws swept forward in a blur. The impact drove him into the moss, ribs crushed by the weight of the blow. Breath tore from his chest in a ragged gasp, fear locking every muscle. In the same instant, Matt fired, his aim steady despite the chaos. The shot struck the animal's side, tearing through fur and flesh. Blood spattered in violent contrast against the greenery, yet still the bear refused to collapse. Its eyes burned with rage, body heaving as it pressed on. Alex chambered another round with mechanical precision, each motion sharpened by survival. Time fractured into fragments, heartbeat, breath, trigger. Ryan, stunned but alive, struggled to rise while the predator loomed close enough to end him. Yet the massive form faltered, its body swaying between the urge to kill and the toll of wounds. With one final roar, it reared onto hind legs, towering impossibly high, then crashed down with shuddering force. Blood stained the moss beneath it, but instead of finishing the charge, it turned. Branches snapped as the bear forced its way back into the trees, retreating into the dense cover of forest until it vanished from sight. Silence rushed in. Only the hunter's ragged breathing broke the stillness. Ryan clutched at his ribs, bruises already spreading where the claws had raked him. Alex lowered his rifle slowly, hands trembling, while Matt kept his scope trained on the tree line, unwilling to release the tension. Though their injuries were not mortal, the memory of the charge, the crushing weight, and the unearthly roar etched itself permanently into their minds. Gradually, they regrouped. With shaky hands, they checked their rifles, gathered scattered packs, and steadied one another with nods and unspoken acknowledgement. The reality of what had unfolded pressed on them with sobering clarity. The Kodiak bear, larger and faster than their imaginations had prepared them for, had come within moments of ending their lives. Every rustle of grass during their retreat sent nerves jolting. Their earlier confidence dissolved into raw awareness of how thin the line between hunter and hunted truly was. By evening, wildlife officers were notified, and word spread across the island. The account served as a warning, passed from camp to community, that even seasoned hunters armed with preparation and rifles could never erase the risk of confronting a Kodiak bear. Officials emphasized caution, reminding hunters that food-conditioned animals, emboldened by human sense, could behave with startling unpredictability. For Alex, Ryan, and Matt, the hunt ended not with triumph, but with survival. Their rifles carried the sharp tang of powder, and their packs bore the silent weight of memory. They left the valley not with pride, but with reverence, shaken by the reminder that the wilderness ruled on its own terms. The mist that settled over spruce and tundra seemed unchanged, yet for them the island would never feel the same. They had faced the untamed force of a predator at full charge, and they walked away humbled, carrying respect carved deep into memory. The backcountry of the Montana Rockies stretched wide and silent on February 14, 2025. Crisp mountain air bit against exposed skin, and endless ridges coated in snow gleamed beneath the pale winter sun. Jason Miller, 34 years old, moved steadily along a narrow slope, skis cutting deliberate lines across the untouched powder. Behind him, Rachel Hayes, 31, and Connor Brooks, 28, followed with practiced ease, their synchronized rhythm showing years of shared experience on difficult terrain. Breath steamed into the cold air, dissipating in brief clouds before vanishing against the white expanse. The three friends had chosen this trip for the solitude of the mountains, eager to leave behind the crowded trails and carve their own path into wild country. Out here, only the hiss of skis, the cry of distant ravens, and the low whisper of wind broke the silence. Each skier carried a heavy backpack with essentials for survival. Avalanche beacons clipped to their jackets glinted faintly when the sun hit just right. Food, ropes, spare clothing, and medical supplies rested in layers, everything carefully packed for days in remote wilderness. More than equipment, however, they carried trust in one another, a bond built through years of shared trips and respect for the unpredictable dangers of winter backcountry. The frozen landscape rewarded their effort with a beauty both stark and serene. Jagged trees sagged under the burden of snow, their branches bent into arches, while streams lay sealed under glassy ice. The route wound toward a frozen waterfall, a landmark they had studied on maps weeks before. By late morning, they reached it and stopped in awe. Ice cascaded down the cliff face in shimmering curtains, each layer a relic of spray frozen in midair, sculpted by days of bitter cold. The group unclipped from their skis, letting them rest in the powder, and planted their poles upright. Phones came out briefly to capture the scene, though no image could match the scale of the moment. For a few breaths, it felt as though the mountains contained nothing but peace. But beneath that calm, another presence stirred. Not far from the waterfall, a grizzly bear scavenged through an abandoned hunter's cache, buried shallowly under snow and brush. Hunger, sharpened by a harsh winter, drove it relentlessly. Scent carried by the wind reached its sensitive nose, the faint aroma of food packed tightly in the skiers' bags, mingling with the sound of laughter and the clatter of poles. Curiosity and instinct shifted to pursuit. With astonishing speed for its size, the animal left cover, each stride surging over drifts and icy gullies. The trio's voices were suddenly answered by the thunder of massive paws striking the snow. Jason, turning by chance, caught the first glimpse of movement, a dark shape bearing down across the slope with terrifying power. The sheer size stunned him. The bear's fur rippled with every motion, its bulk flowing forward like an avalanche with claws. For a fleeting moment, it lost traction on an icy patch, skidding sideways in a spray of snow. Yet it recovered instantly, lowering its head and charging harder. Jason pivoted desperately on his skis, adrenaline flooding his veins, but the predator moved too fast. A paw swung in a devastating arc, claws gleaming like curved blades. The blow struck his shoulder, hurling him into the powder where he tumbled violently. His arm flared with pain, fabric tearing under the impact, leaving him half buried and gasping for breath. Rachel froze at the sight, her mind locked in horror as Jason crumpled like a rag doll. Instinct snapped her back into motion. She tore loose her backpack straps and hurled the pack toward the animal, the heavy thud landing near its forelegs. Connor followed instantly, flinging his own gear with equal force. The movement startled the bear, its charge halting for a split second. It responded with a roar that shook the clearing, rearing up before slamming both paws down, sending cascades of snow tumbling like a small avalanche. The ground trembled under its weight. Rachel and Connor raised their poles, thrusting them outward in a trembling barrier. Jason struggled to rise, his arm burning from the impact, bruises already spreading beneath shredded fabric. He forced himself to his knees, choking on snow, ears ringing from the animal's roar. Rachel's voice rose in sharp tones, meant to distract, though the words dissolved against the chaos of sound. Connor hurled a smaller bundle of supplies directly into the bear's chest. The animal swiped through it effortlessly, shredding fabric and scattering clothing across the slope. Yet that diversion bought them seconds that meant survival. The standoff stretched unbearably long. The bear circled with heavy steps, growls rumbling low in its throat, testing the skiers as prey. Rachel's arms ached with strain as she gripped her poles tight. Connor searched frantically for more objects to throw. Jason fought to rise fully. Snow caked across his jacket, his breath ragged. Every sound, the crunch of snow under claws, the rush of wind between rocks, felt magnified. Without warning, the predator lunged again, snow exploding beneath its paws. But just as it closed the gap, it veered sharply aside, seizing one of the torn packs. Teeth and claws ripped through straps and fabric. Supplies spilled and shredded across the snow. Its breathing thundered in the clearing. Then, As abruptly as it had come, the bear turned away. Muscles coiled, it bounded toward the pines, crashing through trees until only silence and churned snow remained. For several long moments, the three skiers stood frozen. They listened only to their own harsh breaths, the creak of branches, and the hollow beat of hearts still pounding. Jason pulled himself upright at last, clutching his shoulder, grimacing at the bruises beneath torn fabric. Rachel steadied him while Connor gathered the scattered remains of their gear. Relief mingled with trembling exhaustion, each friend aware of how close the encounter had come to ending in tragedy. Their return to movement was slow. Skis clipped back on shakily, poles gripped tight. The group moved in formation down the slope, scanning every shadow and tree line. The trip that had begun as celebration of winter adventure had turned into a sobering reminder of the wild's unpredictability. Every slide of skis over snow echoed with the memory of claws, roars, and Jason's fall into the powder. Later, when authorities were informed, word spread across the region. Wildlife officials warned of the risks posed by abandoned caches. Whether supplies stored for later or bait left behind, such remnants drew predators into areas where people least expected them. Even the remotest backcountry slopes could transform without warning into the site of a deadly confrontation. For Jason, Rachel, and Connor, the lesson was carved deep. The mountains had given them both beauty and terror, and the memory of that frozen waterfall, its stillness broken by thunderous pause, would remain etched as long as they returned to the backcountry. The campground in upstate New York lay quiet on the evening of July 28, 2022, the air heavy with the warmth of midsummer and the steady hum of insects weaving through the trees. Families had settled into their tents, while the glow of lanterns flickered like soft stars scattered across the clearing. The faint scent of wood smoke drifted upward from the small fires that dotted the site, carrying with it the essence of summer nights outdoors. For Tina Marshall, 35, and her husband Evan, 37, the evening carried the familiar rhythm of a summer retreat, the kind of calm they sought after long weeks of routine and work. Their dog, Buddy, darted happily across the grass, chasing tossed sticks with endless enthusiasm, while the couple sat close to their fire. They roasted marshmallows, allowed their voices to drop into low, comfortable tones, and let the setting lull them into ease. They were unaware that just beyond the edge of the forest, something powerful and unpredictable had already slipped closer. The shadows deepened gradually as the firelight danced across the trunks of surrounding trees, twisting with the rising smoke. From within that growing darkness, movement stirred, silent, steady, and purposeful. A large black bear, drawn by the aroma of food and the sugary scent of roasting marshmallows, wandered out from the deeper woods toward the campground. Its broad frame moved without sound through the brush until it reached the edge of the clearing. For several moments it lingered there, studying the fire, the dog running across the grass, and the two figures seated near the flames. Then, with decisive intent, it lowered its head and stepped forward. The first hint of danger came with the sharp crack of branches under heavy paws, followed instantly by Buddy's sudden barking as the dog spotted the intruder and rushed toward it. Tina reacted with shock, the stick in her hand slipping to the ground as she turned, eyes locking on the massive shape breaking from the tree line. The animal surged into view, the orange glow of firelight catching in its eyes, while cries of alarm began to rise from nearby campsites. At first, the bear's attention remained fixed on the frantic, barking dog that twisted and darted just out of reach. It lunged once, jaws snapping, but when the smaller animal swerved away with desperate agility, the predator swung instead toward Tina. Its speed was unnerving. She dropped instantly, diving behind the picnic table as adrenaline surged through her body. The swing of its paw passed close enough for her to feel the air shift. The fire flared behind her as sparks and embers scattered upward in the disturbance. One ember landed against her sleeve, smoldering into the fabric as she rolled across the grass, heart pounding while she beat the heat away. The flames cracked and hissed with sudden force, climbing higher as the bear's roar reverberated across the entire clearing. Families huddled in their tents could hear the guttural sound, a noise that pressed fear into the still night. Evan reacted in the only way available, by seizing the nearest object at hand. He thrust a folding chair forward, a flimsy barrier against the weight of the predator. The metal frame clattered against its chest, but the effort carried little force. With a crushing swipe, the bear knocked the chair aside, claws grazing Evan's arm and leaving shallow cuts that stung immediately. He stumbled backward, nearly losing balance, while Buddy circled with sharp, relentless barks, his small body darting and weaving around the scene. The bear pressed onward, drawn both by the scent of food scattered across the table and by the flurry of human movement. Its head swung side to side, testing each motion, gauging each figure lit by firelight. Tina crouched low behind the bench, her sleeve still faintly scorched, breath sharp and uneven. Evan positioned himself between her and the animal, his body tense, knowing sudden motion could provoke disaster. Across the campground, other voices rose in fear. Campers shouted, their cries carrying into the trees, while others struck metal poles against frames, creating a clanging rhythm that cut through the dark. Flashlights flicked on, beams scattering against branches and brush. The combined noise and lights broke through the predator's intent, interrupting its steady advance. The bear froze for the first time, ears twitching, breath rising in visible puffs into the cooling air. The pause offered a narrow chance. Tina clutched Evan's arm, urging him to move back while Buddy continued to circle protectively. Together, the three retreated quickly across the grass, ducking beneath guy lines and stumbling through the shadows until they reached their tent. Inside, they collapsed against the thin shelter, lungs burning and nerves frayed. Though the fabric provided no true protection, it created at least a fragile barrier between them and the night outside. Minutes stretched long as the bear lingered near the fire, its head lowered toward the ground, sniffing at scraps, pacing with steps that pressed heavily into the soil. Campers listened from their shelters to the crunch of leaves, the weight shifting, and the occasional snort that pierced the silence. At last, the animal turned, slipped back toward the forest, and disappeared into the trees. The sounds faded gradually, until only the steady crackle of firewood remained. When movement returned to the campground, it came hesitantly. Tina examined her sleeve. Fabric charred, but her skin only reddened. Evan inspected the shallow cuts across his arm, stinging yet not severe. Both remained shaken, bodies trembling as adrenaline ebbed, the memory of the roar echoing in their ears. Buddy pressed tightly against them, his body trembling from alarm. By morning, authorities arrived to assess the site. Their warnings were stern. Even ordinary routines could attract dangerous wildlife. Food left exposed, the sweet aroma of marshmallows and the presence of pets all increased the risk of encounters. The lesson carried weight across the campground, a sobering reminder that the line between peaceful recreation and sudden danger was far thinner than most realized. The alpine lake in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania lay perfectly still on the morning of August 10, 2024. Its surface reflected the clear summer sky like a sheet of glass, while steep pine-covered slopes rose sharply along its edges. The air was crisp, filled with the mingled scents of wet earth, resin, and mountain flowers. On the shallow shoreline, Alex Dumitrescu, 34, waded through the cold water, his steps deliberate on the slippery stones. Close by, Victor Stan, 31, and Irina Popescu, 28, splashed and played, their laughter carrying across the basin after hours of hiking along rugged alpine trails. Towels and backpacks lay in a bright pile on the sun-warmed rocks, their belongings spread casually, as if the mountains were theirs alone. Their small dog, Charlie, darted along the shore, weaving between stones, occasionally plunging into the shallows before sprinting back out again. For a short while, the lake felt like a private sanctuary, silent and untouched, except for their voices and movements. Then the atmosphere shifted. A shadow stirred at the tree line, and the fragile stillness fractured. Without warning, a massive brown bear erupted from the edge of the forest, bursting through undergrowth with terrifying speed. Rocks clattered beneath its weight, and water splashed as it charged across the shallows, dark fur bristling and matted from dampness, muscles coiling and rippling with each step. The first indication of danger had been only the faint snap of a branch, but the reality came in the form of a deep, bone-rattling roar that rolled across the water and froze every muscle in their bodies. Alex had barely a moment to register what loomed before him before the predator struck. With astonishing power, it lunged forward and knocked him violently into the lake. Cold water closed around him as claws ripped through fabric and skin, tearing deep scratches into his shoulder. The shock of icy current mingled with sharp, radiating pain as he thrashed, fighting to regain his balance. Victor and Irina reacted instantly, instincts driving them. They splashed water furiously toward the animal and moved with frantic energy, attempting to divert its attention. Victor snatched up a long stick from the shoreline and hurled it in the bear's direction, the motion clumsy yet desperate. Irina followed by kicking waves across the shallows, forcing spray toward the enormous form. The bear responded with another swipe, sending shoes, towels, and bags tumbling into the water. The clearing erupted into chaos, splashes, shouts, roars, and the grinding of stones under claws. Alex, dazed but driven by survival, clawed his way toward shore. His blood mingled with the lake's surface, faint streaks drifting in the water around him. Slick rocks betrayed his footing, but he pressed on, scrambling over each ridge of stone as the predator pursued. The animal's heavy paws slapped down, sending up cold arcs of spray, while its jaws opened and closed with low, guttural sounds that reverberated through the basin. Victor and Irina continued their desperate resistance. Each time the bear veered toward Alex, they advanced a step closer, reckless but determined to break its focus. They waved their arms and stamped, forcing noise and motion into the confrontation, though every moment placed them at risk of the animal's deadly reach. The water chilled their skin and slowed their movements, yet fear kept them moving. The bear tested them repeatedly, lunging, retreating, circling, its massive frame dominating the clearing. Time stretched unbearably. Every second felt like an eternity as the struggle played out. The bear scattered gear, tore at the shallows, and splashed forward again and again, yet hesitation began to creep into its movements. Rocks shifted under its paws, and water dragged against its strides, slowing the surging power of its attack. That pause, however brief, gave Alex the chance he needed. He finally pulled himself onto firmer ground, collapsing against the stony edge. Victor and Irina followed quickly, each panting, trembling from the adrenaline that surged through their bodies. The bear halted at the edge of deeper water, its head lifted, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air, muscles tensed and relaxed, rippling beneath the dark pelt as though it weighed its decision. Then, with a deep roar that echoed against the ridges, the predator turned away. Slowly, deliberately, it lumbered back toward the forest. The undergrowth swallowed its bulk, and in its wake lay only scattered belongings, broken silence, and water churned into restless ripples. The three friends remained frozen, listening to the quiet that returned after the crashing violence. Their breaths came ragged, and their bodies trembled with the sharp edge of fear. Alex's shoulder bore gashes, bruised and bleeding, while Victor carried shallow scrapes across his arms. Irina's skin ached from the repeated shock of frigid water. Though injured and shaken, they remained alive. The realization settled heavily, mixing relief with disbelief. They moved cautiously along the rocks, retrieving what remained of their belongings. Towels were soaked, food scattered, and packs torn, but recovery mattered less than survival. Every step they took, their eyes flicked toward the tree line, haunted by the thought that the bear might return. Later warnings circulated through local authorities, urging hikers and campers to remember that even remote alpine lakes held hidden dangers when powerful, food-conditioned brown bears roamed nearby. Summer months heightened the risk, as human presence near water sources could draw animals with instinctive persistence. The encounter became a sobering reminder that outdoor recreation, even in tranquil settings, could turn into a sudden contest for survival. Respect, caution, and awareness were more than guidelines. They were essential defenses. That day, Alex, Victor, and Irina left the lake bruised, drenched, and carrying an experience that would remain with them permanently. The outing had begun with carefree laughter and ended with exhaustion, fear, and awe at the raw force of the wilderness. Every glance back at the dark line of forest brought a memory of the charging predator, of its eyes fixed on them, and its sheer power. The alpine landscape remained beautiful, yet beneath its beauty lurked a presence that demanded respect. For the three who survived, the lake would forever be both a place of serenity and the site of a reminder that nature, however majestic, always carried shadows capable of transforming calm into chaos. The morning of March 12, 2024, dawned gray and brittle over the frozen waters near Svalbard, Norway. The Arctic sky hung heavy with low clouds, the pale sun barely lifting above the horizon. On the deck of a small research boat, Lars Anderson, 34, and Eric Johansson, 31, moved with care as the vessel pitched slightly with the shifting ice floes. They had been in the area for weeks, collecting ice core samples to monitor environmental change. Each instrument was handled with precision, every piece of gear packed carefully to withstand the harsh conditions. The Arctic air carried its distinct scent, cold, metallic, faintly salty, and from below deck came the smell of sealed fish crates, baiting a danger still unseen. For hours, the two men worked in near silence, movements deliberate, their gloved hands steady as they handled fragile equipment. Readings were recorded, samples transferred into insulated containers, and tools adjusted against the cold. Though the sea lay calm for the season, shifting flows created treacherous paths, demanding constant vigilance. Lars balanced along the slick hull as he adjusted a sampling rig, while Eric steadied the boat and scanned the horizon. The region's wildlife had become familiar. Seals sprawled on distant ice, seabirds wheeling overhead, occasional whale spouts, but none of these had carried the immediate danger that soon appeared with shocking speed. The first sign was a shadow. On the nearest floe, a shape loomed larger than any seal or walrus. At first, Lars mistook it for drifted snow or jagged ice, until it shifted. Then the massive head, black eyes and white pelt resolved into the unmistakable form of a polar bear. Drawn by the scent of fish below deck, it advanced with steady determination. Muscles rippled beneath thick fur, paws pressing into ice with immense weight, cracks radiating outward from each step. Instantly, adrenaline surged through the two men as the predator fixed its gaze on their small vessel. Before either could react, the bear lunged onto the hull. The impact rocked the boat violently, sending unsecured instruments and crates sliding across the deck. Water splashed over the sides, icy spray mingling with snow as the sound of cracking ice magnified the chaos. One massive swipe caught Lars across the shoulder and arm, tearing through layers of insulated clothing and leaving deep bruises beneath. He staggered back in pain, clutching at the equipment in his grasp, instinctively protecting the fragile instruments, even as his body reeled. Eric scrambled for the motor. His gloved hands slipped on controls as the vessel lurched beneath the animal's weight. He forced the levers forward, fighting to maneuver between the ice floes, while Lars moved frantically to draw the predator's attention. Arms waved and boots kicked loose crates, filling the air with noise and motion. The bear responded with another crushing swipe, splintering wood and tearing open stores of fish. Shattered crates spilled contents across the deck and into the frigid sea. The roar that followed echoed across the Arctic expanse, clouds of breath steaming in the cold air. The bear lunged again, striking the hull with such force that the entire vessel shuddered. Lars ducked low, his arm raised against another blow, while Eric kept the motor engaged, forcing the boat forward in erratic bursts through slush and narrowing passages of ice. Every movement threatened catastrophe. One slip could place them under the predator's claws, and one wrong turn could wedge the hull tight against jagged floes, trapping them with no escape. The struggle stretched into long, punishing minutes. The bear clawed at crates, swiped at Lars, and scattered fragile instruments across the slick deck. Water pooled around their boots, freezing instantly on exposed metal, while every jolt of the boat threatened to pitch them into icy water. Despite Eric's desperate efforts at the helm, progress was agonizingly slow, and the predator's strength dominated the scene. At last, the animal hesitated. Lifting its head, it sniffed the air, its body heaving with heavy breaths that drifted in plumes across the boat. For a tense moment, it stood as if deciding whether to continue. One final strike splintered another crate, but then it turned. With deliberate motion, the bear slid back onto the floe, retreating toward the shelter of larger ice fields. Its massive form vanished across the white expanse, leaving chaos in its wake. A deck littered with broken instruments, soaked gear, and two shaken men. Lars examined his shoulder and arm, finding dark bruises where claws had struck, the skin tender and raw. Eric's muscles ached from gripping the controls, his arms stiff with strain. Both men were drenched from spray, exhaustion written in every movement as they stabilized the boat and salvaged scattered equipment. The sharp air smelled of torn fish and churned ice, a lingering reminder of the danger that had brushed so close. Warnings soon followed from authorities, urging all research crews in the Arctic to remain vigilant. Even seasoned personnel in well-equipped vessels could face sudden encounters with polar bears, driven by instinct and drawn by food. Experts emphasized strict storage protocols, constant alertness, and respect for the unpredictable presence of predators on drifting ice. For Lars and Eric, the confrontation left more than bruises and scattered tools. What had begun as a routine day of environmental study had transformed into a struggle against one of the Arctic's most formidable hunters. They left the site shaken but alive, their minds imprinted with the image of the bear's power and speed. Every glance toward the drifting floes carried a reminder of its reach, a warning that nature's dominance in this harsh environment remained absolute. The Arctic's beauty endured, but within it lurked a constant truth. Survival was never guaranteed, and every moment on the ice balanced human endeavor against forces far beyond control.